My uncle left me a shifty little bar in his will. Something followed me home. My bar is no stranger to weird happenings, but the one I'm planning on telling you about today might have been the one to leave the strongest impression on me. Well, maybe not the strongest, but definitely in my top 3. As you can probably imagine, that's saying quite a lot. As for when this happened, I'm not quite sure. But I do know I was on a friendlier basis with the spirits back then already, so it couldn't have been too early. The day in question began very pleasantly. There was a good amount of people coming in to grab drinks, but not enough for it to be stressful. Everyone was in a reasonably good mood. Even May wasn't giving me any snark that day. Now, with everything being this nice and easy, it felt like the day simply had to be shaping up to something bad. You just can't have this much good luck all at once. Not with an establishment like this. So let's just say I was wary, though I wasn't sure what to be wary of. After cleaning, we all sat down to watch some TV, which we do quite often after closing, by the way. The bar spirits aren't always on board. Sometimes they only want to get up, work, then go back downstairs right after, but occasionally they do like spending time simply hanging out. I'm pretty sure Mac used to encourage them to relax as well, and I really want them to have as much free time as they used to have when he was still around. Maybe even a little extra. I've always wanted them to loosen up. Anyway, the 4 of them had pulled up a bunch of our cushioned chairs in a spot they could easily see the screen from, and I was laying sprawled out on the bench behind them. As uneventful as the day had been, it still left me exhausted. I was only half awake as I decided to take a small nap. But from where I was laying, I could see the counter and, of course, my employees. And through my tired, hooded eyes, I saw a bottle on one of the upper shelves move. I squinted, too lazy to raise my head and almost certain I'd imagined it. The shelf I was watching was holding some of our more expensive drinks. We'd normally lock them away at night, but we hadn't done it yet. There were just 5 of those bottles, and Andric had them neatly placed at the exact same distance from one another to really bring out how good they looked. So the middle one, the one that had been shifted, now it stood out. The longer I thought about it, the more I wondered whether I was actually seeing things. It took all my strength to keep my eyes open just a little longer, but I managed to monitor the top shelf long enough to see another bottle move, this time on the far left. Puzzled, I pushed myself up. Hey, did any of you guys see that just now? I murmured, clearing my throat. Saw what? Danica asked, swiftly glancing back at me over her shoulder. I groaned and raked through my hair with my fingers. Oh, there's something wrong behind the counter, I think. Those bottles up there, they moved on their own. I quickly wiped a bit of drool from the corner of my mouth. Is there any chance you were dreaming? Andric asked, not looking away from the TV. No, and I'm sure you don't mind that our fancy bottles that you love dusting off so much aren't standing exactly 6 inches apart from one another anymore. No, it's 7 inches. Andric slowly rose from his seat, a confused frown on his face. Hey, you're right. That's not... His voice trailed off. He made his way behind the counter and was just about to reach for the shelf when suddenly he stumbled. It was almost like he'd been pushed by some sort of unseen force. I swear I could see his belly bend a tiny bit, like somebody had rammed their arm into him. Andric gasped, but quickly caught his footing. He stared at the spot he'd just been standing in utter bewilderment, then looked over at us again. Don't move, he mouthed. I froze in place, my back pressed up against the wall, eyes flitting over to the others. I found that Bo and the other 2 girls were sitting just as still as I was. I shot Andric a questioning look, but he appeared to be focused on something else. He seemed to be scanning the small space around him before slowly backing off towards the door to the back room. He pressed himself up against it, still looking alert. He gave us a quick nod and a wave of his hand like he was motioning for us to come over to him. One by one, we hesitantly got up and made our way behind the counter. Not losing a single word, Andric opened the door for us and we hurriedly slipped inside. He followed right behind us and pulled the door shut. Until he finally found the light switch, we all stood huddled up on top of the staircase in the pitch black. When the light came flickering on, I let out a sigh of relief. Bo spoke up first, his voice barely more than a low whisper. What's going on? Julia, you were right. There's something there, or someone, I'm not sure. I can't believe it got past me. I swear I would have noticed normally. He sighed. Oh God, I'm never watching TV again. Wait, what's out there? I asked him. That's the thing, he answered. I don't know. I can't see it for some reason, but I sensed it when I was moving around there next to me. And, when it punched me, of course. I turned to Bo. Can't you go out there and take care of it? He usually handles all matters of security. Andrick answered in his place. It's not good to go up against something you can't see. It's either using some kind of cloak or spell or, what would be even worse, it's strong enough to disappear without any help. Both ways, it'd be best to wait for a good opportunity instead of simply running out there. Then what do? We can't stay in here. I don't want it messing up the place, I hissed. I think it was trying to get our attention, and that's it, Danica told us in a low voice. We can't seriously let it think it spooked us. She was right. I was literally hiding with a bunch of ghosts from what was probably another ghost. Maybe it was time we established some dominance. We're going back out, I ordered, squeezing over to the door. But Andrick turned to stand in front of it, blocking me from reaching the handle. You're forgetting that it punched me. It could be violent. You don't want it smashing one of those bottles over your head, do you? I'm just glad I already put the knives away. I'm not going to spend the night in here with you guys either, I replied in the same hushed tone as I gently nudged his arm aside and closed my fingers around the door handle. I cautiously pressed it down and opened the door just a crack, leaning forward to peek outside. I could only see a small portion of the space behind it, but everything seemed to be quiet. I couldn't see anything moving either, so I took a nervous step forward, the door swinging open. I gestured for the spirits to follow. Standing back in the open room, we all glanced around in uncertainty. Everything looked perfectly normal. I let out a soft sigh and wiped the sweat-laced palms on my pants. I was obviously still unnerved, but at least it appeared whatever had happened could possibly be over. At least nothing was attacking us out of the blue. You think it's still here? It feels like it's gone. Andrick looked at the other bar spirits. They all either shrugged or nodded their approval. I swallowed. Okay, well, maybe that was it. Maybe this is like that little girl in the necklace. Something came by, gave us a scare, and left. And you guys were distracted. Things slipped past you. It's all right. Things happen. So, what do you want us to do now? Bo asked. I thought for a few seconds before telling them to lock up everything that could be thrown over or broken just in case. I'd also prefer it if one of you could stay up and keep watch around here tonight, I added. Andrick volunteered, and I promised I'd let him go to sleep as soon as he wanted the day after. But he didn't even care. I think the fact that something unwelcome had gotten into the bar without him really noticing hurt his pride. When I was sure everything was taken care of, I got on my way to my car, which I'd parked in a nearby spot a short walk away from the bar. That night, these few steps felt like an eternity though. Everything was so quiet. I could hear some noises in the distance, but they were too far away to give me that feeling of reassurance I desperately needed. My chest was light with relief when I finally reached my beat-up sedan and climbed inside. On my way home, I listened to the radio in an attempt to ease my mind. I couldn't tell why I was still anxious. Everything was all right. The bar was safe under Andrick's watch, and if something were to happen again, he'd be able to call upon the other three spirits. I was sure everything would be just fine, yet something felt off. At the time, I wasn't living at my parents' place anymore. Not long after inheriting the bar, I had moved into a cheap yet relatively spacious apartment which I'd grown rather fond of. The only downside being that it wasn't as close to the bar as I'd hoped it would be. But everything close to the town center was ridiculously overpriced. Anyway, once I'd arrived home, I hurriedly peeled off my clothes and hopped into bed. I figured all I had to do was sleep off the night's excitement and everything would be better in the morning. I was certainly motivated to do so. I dozed off the second my head hit the pillow. I woke up to a loud, shrill noise, like glass or porcelain shattering. I sat up instantly, dazed and confused but alert. Everything was silent. Then, there was this low, crunching noise. It was coming from somewhere in the living room. My heart sank. There was someone there with me. Trying to combat my groggy state, I rubbed my eyes and pinched my arm, hoping the tiny, painful sting would clear my mind. A look at my alarm clock told me it was 4 a.m. If there really was an intruder, I had to call the police. Oh, where had I left my phone again? I cursed inwardly as I remembered setting it up to charge on the kitchen counter. To get there, I'd have to go through the living room, which was obviously out of the question. I decided I had to get outside right away. I slowly and quietly slid out of bed, placing both feet on the cold, smooth floor. With bated breath, I padded over to my bedroom door, nudging it open and slipping out into the hallway. All the lights were off. For some reason, the darkness gave my surroundings an eerie sense of unfamiliarity. Boxes, lamps, and cabinets were nothing but shadowy silhouettes standing in my way. This might sound silly, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. I snuck past the doorway leading off to the side of the living room and headed straight for the front door. I don't know if I'd expected it to be open, but it was not, and when I reached for the handle, I found it to be locked. I frantically began searching around for my keys in the darkness, still desperately trying to stay quiet. They were gone, nowhere to be found. Whoever had gotten in had taken them. My mind raced. What else was there to do? I could hardly climb out through the windows. I was way too high up. If I was to hide away in one of the other rooms, the intruder would find me sooner or later. There were keys to lock all these doors inside the apartment with, but, and I'm ashamed to admit this, I had no idea where they were. I finally decided to barricade myself in the bedroom. My heart pounding in my chest, I made my way back down the hallway. I could hear rattling coming from the living room again. Curiosity took over me and I stopped outside the doorway, slowly leaning over to peer inside. My stomach dropped. There was no one there. The room was void of any people whatsoever, and yet all of my drawers and shelves had been rifled through. The papers, magazines, and books they'd been holding laying scattered all over the floor. The cupboard where I'd stored all of my dishes stood wide open, and I watched in a mix of horror and disbelief as one by one, bowls, plates, glasses alike were swiped from their spots and thrown down onto the floor with such force they shattered into a dozen pieces. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Whatever had been inside the bar earlier had absolutely followed me home. It was then that the noise stopped. Everything fell still. I backed off, shrinking behind the doorframe again. I didn't dare take a single breath. All of a sudden, I was knocked off my feet. A body I couldn't see bashing into me and throwing me to the ground. My head bounced off the carpeted floor. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. But before I could so much as finish that thought, I felt something pressed down on my throat. It was almost like someone had placed their lower arm over it and was now slowly shifting their weight onto it, choking me. I struggled beneath them, trying to shake them off, but the person, or whatever it was, remained firmly in place. I felt my head begin to spin, panicking as the need to breathe grew stronger. My whole chest felt like it was burning up, the pain accompanied by a sharp, agonizing pull somewhere inside my throat. My vision began to falter, sudden sparks of light bursting in front of my inner eye as I stared up at the ceiling lamp, unable to turn my head. I was gurgling and whimpering, trying to beg this invisible thing for mercy. I was already too exhausted to keep struggling, and now attempting to focus what was left of my energy on sucking in what little air I could still draw into my body. Then, suddenly, the weight was lifted from my throat. I gasped for air, taking in deep, heavy breaths. Relieved even though I could still feel that large, unseen body on top of me. When my chest was finally rising and falling steadily again, I craned my neck, trying to at least face this creature. "Please," I pressed out. "What do you want?" I felt something touch the side of my face. It's a sensation almost akin to that of skin, but way colder and more rough. A raspy, guttural voice responded. It sounded like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was deep, warped, and interrupted by wheezing breaths of its owner, which weren't unlike those of my own from just a minute prior. "We apologize for the delay. Norman sends his regards." With that, the body laying on top of me disappeared. The person didn't stand up or anything. They were simply there one second and gone the next. I was left alone, lying on the carpet in my hallway, still staring up at the dark ceiling. To say I was too shaken to move would be an understatement. It was rather as though the shock of what had just happened had drained me of all my strength. I suppose you could say I was overwhelmed? Still doesn't do it justice. When I gathered the energy to stand up and walk again, I went to check on the mess in the living room. I found my apartment keys right there in the cabinet, in the same place I'd formerly been occupied with a stack of plates. Nothing was missing. My phone, my wallet, my credit card, it was all there. I didn't doubt that the invisible entity had been looking for something before they descended into a pointless rage, but apparently they hadn't found it. I didn't call the police. I knew immediately that this was something personal, and it would turn out I'd have to deal with it for a long time to come.